For the last 8 years, we've been hearing about how the Muslims have had a part in the history of this nation, the founding of this nation, and everything. And I think about 4 years ago, they started writing a Muslim-based history book for the schools. And I don't think it ever got that far, because I haven't heard anything after they started trying to write it. But we need to look at what our founding really was in real documented history. Now, I brought some books. I'm going to read out this one. I've got this one here, and then I've laid some others on the back table back there if you want to look at them, from David Barton. David Barton is probably the #1 prominent historical writer of this day. He documents everything that he writes from congressional records and government records. His people go through and research what actually was stated, what actually happened, all the events and everything, and then he documents them in his book. For the last 8 years, I've been hearing different times statements made without any documentation. Anytime a man holds an office or a woman holds an office, that doesn't mean that they have a right to determine what's history and what's not. If they make a statement without any documentation, they're a human being who's a citizen of the United States, and that's as far as it goes, and they've got their opinion. I like what the chief of police said when he was being interviewed by one of the Fox News commentators concerning the shooting in North Carolina. And she asked him something about, well, you know, they say that he had a book and he was reading and all this. He said, you can take up the opinions of anybody you want. You call me here to give you facts. I'm giving you facts. That's what we need to get back to. Get back to the facts. What actually started this nation? Now, Proverbs 4, verses 10 through 15. Let's stand while we read this. He says, hear, my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in right paths. When you walk, your steps will not be hindered. And when you run, you will not stumble. Then he says, take firm hold of instruction. Do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. Instruction here has reference to factual, true instruction. Not just opinions, but research what the factual truth of the instructions are. He says, do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil. And he didn't say just don't enter into it. He goes farther. He says, avoid it, do not travel on it, turn away from it, and pass on. We need to think about that kind of stuff when we're dealing with, especially any time there's an election year comes up. The year or two before that, we're going to be hearing all sorts of things said. We need to pay attention to what he's saying here. Look at who's speaking, look at their lives, look at their motivation. This idea of separation of church and state, you can say whatever you want to. It's not in the Constitution. It never has been, never will be. It is a lie. You cannot separate a person's God that he worships from what he's doing at any time. He can say he's not doing that, but that God is what that he worships is what makes him do and motivates him to do what he's worshiping or what he's doing. He worships the God that he worships by doing what he's doing the way he's doing it. That's just simple human nature. So the separation of church and state was a fallacy. It was a trick to show that you could say anything you wanted to, put it out in public, and the people will go for it if it's out there enough. And they proved it works. Now they're teaching in schools that's in the Constitution. I brought this up some years back on Sunday morning. And the history teacher they used to come here in high school, come outside and said, Don, I need to talk to you about this because I don't know where you get this, but that is in the Constitution. I said, where? And I had a guy come back in because we still had a bunch of constitutions back there. I said, go back in there and get a constitution. He brought it out and I said, here, read it and find it for me and bring it back to me. He said, Don, they taught that in college, that's in the Constitution. I said, that's not the only lie they teach in college either. I said, we have to research what we're being taught by everybody who teaches, or we're going to be duped with all the lies that are going around about everything. Let's go to the Lord in prayer now. Let's ask Him to open us up to understand what He's saying to us this morning. Father, I want to thank you so much for your wisdom, for your willingness to allow us to have access to understanding what you're wanting us to see, what you're wanting us to understand. This on this nation, Father, you brought this about. It's so obvious by all the things that you've done in the past, in the starting of it, that you had your hand in it. Now, Father, we ask you to keep it where you want it to be. Put the leader in the position that you want in that position, in Congress, presidency, vice presidency, governors, everything, to make your people able to have freedom to worship you and do what you're wanting us to do. So, Father, we bow to you for you to take charge of everything and to teach us. Open up our understanding and open up our strength to be able to bow to you in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. You can be seated. When a government starts off, the only way it can start is establishing laws. Now, we talk about laws all the time. What's the good thing about laws? What's the benefit of laws? I've got down here the definition on your notes. Webster says that law means a rule of conduct or action prescribed or formally recognized as binding or enforced by a controlling authority. I've tried to reword this in the next statement as a practical way of understanding it. It's established parameters and guidelines to make it effective to relate and treat one another in society. That's, in essence, what laws are for. They put the boundaries down and enforce those boundaries to where everybody treats each other a certain way. Now, every society has a different set of laws. You go to a Muslim society, you're going to find a different set of laws than you find in our society here. They don't like our society functioning in their society. Now, when this happens, it's to bring an order about to where everybody, especially when this nation was settled, there's a reason for the laws they established and for the documents that they wrote, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights and everything, so that every single individual would have a freedom of rights that doesn't impose on the next person's rights. So, now, with these, what I hear now going on more than anything is the defining of what's right and wrong by how I feel. This is the way I feel. I don't feel that this is true. And we hear this all the time by different ones. I want to put this down on emotional feelings. Operating on emotional feeling destroys. When we allow emotions to take charge of our motivation, we destroy what we're involved in. We destroy ourselves because it blocks our thinking from being able to think straight and pay attention to what's really going on and look at all the facts. Operating on fact establishes strength in a society. Whenever we're dealing with something, the only way that we can operate functionally is to put our emotions on the shelf and look at the facts. Deal with the facts. Once we start dealing with the facts, the emotions are going to be affected. one way or another. We may like what we find, we may not like. But we got to keep the emotions affected, not used to motivate. The facts has to be the only thing we allow to motivate us. Now, I put John 14 and verse 15 down here. Something that Jesus said. He says, if you love me, keep my commandments. He didn't say, if you love me, I want you to like my commandments. He didn't say, I want you to feel good about my commandments. He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. If we love our lifestyles or our government, our laws, our freedoms, we will obey the laws according to fact, not according to feeling. And because it doesn't do what I'd like for it to do, this man over here, this woman over here, it doesn't matter. Facts are facts. This is the law. Whenever the law is broken, it's got to be reconciled, one way or another. Now, a government is established on these laws. Our forefathers set laws to establish this government. It will only remain a strong government as long as these laws are enforced. When they are removed and belittled and pushed aside because we want something else and we feel a certain way, then our government society is going to get weaker and weaker and get to the point that somebody else can take us over with their laws. And then they'll rule us. We'll not be ruling ourselves. I want you to look at some of these things that's happened in our government history to give you some relaxation as to how the forefathers thought about God in setting this government up. And don't dismiss this little part I put in your bulletin too. We're going to look at these things. In 1892, Supreme Court Justice David Brewer issued a ruling stating, America is a Christian nation. That is a Supreme Court ruling. He looked at all the facts to determine what the ruling would be, and he said after looking at all the facts, this establishes the fact this is a Christian nation. Now, I put a paper that I got this week on the back table back here if you want to write down the address and everything. There's a book out now by David Brewer on this ruling. And I'm going to order it for myself, but I thought some of you might like to have it. In 1932, after the turn of the century, the Supreme Court reaffirmed his ruling by stating, we are a Christian people. Now, what that's based on is not that there's nobody else in here, but it's governed by the principles of this religious state. It's not governed by all these other religious groups in here. It's governed by this one religious thinking system. Now, on your insert of your bulletin, I want you to look at some of the constitutions that were established on the states. I've got 5 of them here. The Delaware Constitution in Article 22, every person who shall be chosen a member of either house or appointed to any office or place of trust shall make and subscribe the following declaration, to wit, I, and then give them their name, do profess faith in God the Father, and in Jesus Christ his only Son, and in the Holy Ghost, one God, blessed forevermore. And I do acknowledge the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. That is the oath that they have to give before they can hold the office in the House, the congressional office seat. Now, is it that way now? I don't know. But it doesn't matter. This shows what it was. This shows the attitude that the forefathers had when they started it. The Pennsylvania Constitution, the Frame of Government, Section 10. And each member of the legislature, before he takes his seat, shall make and subscribe the following declaration. Visually, I do believe in one God, the creator and governor of the universe, the rewarder of the good and the punisher of the wicked, and I do acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration. Look at Massachusetts Constitution, Chapter 6, Article 1. All persons elected to state office or to the legislature must make and subscribe the following declaration visually. I, give their name, do declare that I believe the Christian religion and have firm persuasion of its truth. Look at North Carolina Constitution, Article 32. No person who shall deny the being of God or the truth of the Protestant religion or the divine authority either of the Old or New Testaments, or who shall hold religious principles incompatible with the freedom and safety of the state, shall be capable of holding any office or place of trust or profit in the civil department within this state. I might mention, the person who's president wouldn't be able to hold an office in these states. Maryland Constitution, Article 35, that no other test or qualification ought to be required than such oath of support and fidelity to this state and a declaration of a belief in the Christian religion. That's 5 of the main states who first got started. This was their part of their oath of office. Before anybody could ever take seat in a congressional seat in their state, they had to declare their faith in God and in the scriptures being inspired by God. Now, does that mean that this is not a Christian nation? No, it means more than anything else that it is a Christian nation. It was established that way. Something that's so important that to me, why we need to pay attention to this is because I'm hearing so many people who are God's people saying this is no longer a Christian nation, and I don't think I'm going to vote, or I don't think I'm going to go with it. I'm not going to pledge allegiance to the flag. I'm not going to do this. You know what we're doing? When we do that, we're moving it farther and farther and farther away from the established identity of it being God's nation based on His principles. What does He say in Proverbs 4? Take firm hold of instruction, do not let go, keep her, for she is your life. If we don't hold on to what is true and stand on what is truth, motivated by what is truth, and not what they say it means, but what it really means, then what we're doing is doing what this says. It's our life, and we're giving up our life in that area of our life. I want you to look at some more I've got here. What about the other faiths? Patrick Henry's statement makes it very clear. It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists but by Christians, not on religions, but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here. He says, only as long as this is founded upon Christian principles can other faiths have the freedom to worship the way they want to. Other religions do not allow that freedom of other faiths. They dominate. There's I think it's John Jay, the first Supreme Justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, made the statement, and I can't quote it, but he made the statement that this will not work if we remove the Christian principles. It just won't work. It has to be based on that because that's the only religion that has the principles that will allow all other faiths to have freedom to do what they do in their religious worship. John Adams, in a presidential address to the military on October 1798, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. The ruling by the United States Supreme Court in 1892, I've I'll read the whole thing here. Our laws and our institutions must necessarily be based upon and embody the teachings of the Redeemer of mankind. It is impossible that it should be otherwise. In this sense and to this extent, our civilizations and our institutions are emphatically Christian. In 1811, a court made a ruling that was cited by the U.S. Supreme Court. Whatever strikes at the root of Christianity tends to manifestly do the dissolution of civil government. Anybody can say anything they want to, that this nation was not founded on Christian principles or the worship of God. When they do, they lie. Intentionally lie, or they have never checked out real factual truth. These things would not be in the founding documents of this nation if it was not founded on the worship of Jesus Christ to give everybody the freedom that they need. Now, something else, and I've just dealt with basic main things, not all stuff that you can read in these books at all, to give us an idea. George Washington's testimony, if you ever get a chance, read about a real true biography of George Washington. I found out now they're coming out to try to just completely dissolve any integrity of George Washington by saying he did this with his slaves, he did that with his slaves. I found out in researching he kept slaves. He kept them so they wouldn't be abused. And the slaves honored him and wanted to stay with him. But he kept them so that, and kept an ownership of slaves, so that while he worked to try to dissolve slavery. Now, that's what I found out. You research and find out what you want to. In the French and Indian War, 86 British and American officers were involved in that battle. George Washington was the only officer who had not been shot down off his horse. 86 officers and only one went through. Now, look underneath that. A letter to his family explained that after the battle was over, he took off his jacket and had found 4 bullet holes through it, yet none touched him. Look at the next one. 15 years later, an old Indian chief from far away who had been one of the chiefs in that battle, having heard that Washington had come back to those woods, traveled a long way just to meet with him. The reason was, he said he wanted to meet the man you couldn't kill, because there's some divine protection over him. And he told George Washington in that meeting, he said, I told my braves to shoot the chiefs. Shoot the ones on the horses, and that'll stop it. He said, I shot you. I forget how many numbers of times he said, I shot you, but you wouldn't fall. He said, some other braves shot you, but you wouldn't fall. I told them, don't waste your ammunition. Get the others. He said, and I wanted to meet the man that bullets couldn't kill. That divine protection was on you to where you could not fall in battle. George Washington was protected by God to do what he did in founding this country. There is a painting of George Washington in prayer. Y'all have probably seen it quite a few hundred times in your life. He's out and there's trees behind, and he's out on his knees praying. Out in the trees, there's a man looking around one trunk of the tree. I was told in one of the meetings in Colorado Springs what that was all about. The painter who painted this painted it for a reason. That man was a spy and saw George Washington every so often going out away from all the troops and being by himself, and he wanted to see if he was a spy. If he was going out and meeting with some of the enemy, or if he was meeting with the spy from their side. And he went out there and heard him praying, and he went back and told his commander, said, we've got to give up. He said, a man who talks so personally with God as that man does cannot be beaten. He said, we've got to back off. And they turned their troops around and left. Major marks in history exposing what started this nation. They can say whatever they want to. God started this nation. Something else too, did you know what was the main nationality, the main one who allowed us to win the Revolutionary War? It was a Jew, I think, from France who gave his money to fund it. If he hadn't, we wouldn't have had the money to do it. Jews have had freedom in this country. They've had freedom to worship in this country. When they've been abolished by everybody else, every other nation under the sun, they've been able to come here and have freedom. That is starting to be, there's been, I think, about 6 or 8 years now, maybe longer, that the word's been getting out among the Jewish communities. Look for places to go. It's getting like Germany was. And the statements and the buildings are getting like Germany did before the Holocaust. Look and watch and get out for safety. Dale has been telling me this for years, that it's getting stronger and stronger. And this is why some Jews are moving to Israel from America. Not by armloads, but they are, because they're seeing things they don't like seeing, that they've read about. The only way this nation will fall, the only way, is when God's people stop worshiping God functionally. We can worship Him philosophically all we want to, and it will fall. It's only when we stop worshiping Him as the functional God of our lives. That's why I stress over and over again. Who do I vote for this year? Find out from God. He is God. Functionally allow Him to be the God who tells you who to vote for. He's the only one, as God, who's allowed to choose who's to be president of the United States. Well, I don't like either one that's running. Wonder why God let these two people be ones that's running. I learned a long time ago, when I don't like a major thing that's going on, I better back off and watch what I'm saying. I don't like what God is doing. We better pay attention to what God likes and doesn't like, rather than what we like or don't like. And remember, dead people aren't supposed to like and dislike. If we're crucified with Christ, we're dead. Only Christ is the one in us that's supposed to tell us what He likes and what He doesn't like. This was started on the worship of God. It was allowed to be freed on the worship of God. It will only continue to be a nation under God by His people worshiping Him as the functional God of their lives, even in voting for people running for office. Let's pray. Father, I want to thank You so much. Thank You for allowing us the victory that You've given us, Father, over ourselves, over our lives, over the sin that's controlled our lives. Thank You, Father, for the victory and the freedom You've given us in this country so far to worship You. Father, laws have been passed to try to stifle us, try to stop us from saying what needs to be said. But Father, as God, we trust You to be in control of this nation. Allow Your people the freedom to worship You, and allow us to understand how to worship You as the only God of our lives, not philosophically, but functionally. For You are the only one in charge. You're the only one that has the say as to what happens. And we bow to You in this, Father. We bow to You. Open us up to hear what You're saying at all times. Make our hearts so wrapped up in You as identity that we don't know who we are outside of You. Move us into that kind of identity with You, Father, in Jesus' name.